Hey, if you've ever walked past those beautiful old row houses on Capitol Hill and wondered what's inside, here's your chance. The Capitol Hill Restoration Society's House and Garden Tour is back on May 9th and 10th. 8 private homes, 3 semi-public buildings, and a native plant garden, all in the older part of the neighborhood, with this year's home base right on Barracks Row. We're talking grand Victorian brick, old frame houses, stucco buildings, all the beautiful architecture that we love to nerd out about here on CityCast. Tickets are $40 in advance, $50 at the door, and $30 if you're a CHRS member. Snag yours on Eventbrite now. Today on CityCast DC, you probably had a sense that members of Congress get some special goodies at National Airport. But what are they? I asked Gary Leff, the legendary travel blogger who lived in the DMV for years. Gary spilled some interesting beans, but also talked us through how regular folks can get the same VIP treatment, as well as the Dulles renovation and the secret luxury room hidden inside DCA. Stick around. Today is Monday, April 27th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Gary, welcome.
Thank you.
So you write about flying like nationally or globally, but you also were a longtime DMV resident. So can we talk about how flying out of DC is different than flying out of other places, specifically DCA? Back in March, the Senate passed a proposal to end the preferential treatment of members of Congress there. I didn't even know about the preferential treatment of members of Congress there. How has it typically worked?
So it's been a few things. The history, of course, is that the airport was owned and operated by the federal government, and then leased to the local jurisdiction. And there were certain understandings at the time in terms of making Congress comfortable giving that up until Project Journey at DCA, right, which was the major revamp of the airport that put each of the piers behind security. Mm-hmm. Right. But, it used to be that there was a dedicated parking lot for members of Congress, for Supreme Court justices. So VIP parking that was free. That was lost during the construction. And so members of Congress were relegated to the standard lots, but still given free parking, which was sort of interesting. But DCA is a special beast in a lot of ways, because of course you can't just fly into the airport with a private jet the way you can at most. It requires specific permission. It requires specific procedures with TSA, and getting that approval is very limited. There's a limited number of takeoffs and landings allowed at that airport. And when those were put into place, about 10% of the takeoffs and landings were set aside and expected to be private jet travel, and it's virtually none today. If you're landing at DCA, it's an incredible approach, right? You always want to be on the side facing the district. What they call the river visual approach is cool as you pass the monuments and you're coming in over the river. But boy, if you're a pilot, you do not deviate from the correct approach, or else we're scrambling fighter jets. In best cases, we're sending the plane to Dulles.
When it comes to Congresspeople now, in the year of our Lord 2026, how exactly are they flying differently than the rest of us? What went away as a result of this change?
Oh, so most members of Congress, are not going to get permission to fly private, even if out of national, even if they are flying private. Their campaign committee may be, paying for private travel, for instance, even if their congressional office and taxpayer dollars wouldn't. There are senators who can, certain cabinet secretaries may be able to, VIP designation, but it's not commonly done. They've lost their dedicated parking free parking facility. Airlines are going to give a different treatment to members of Congress than most other folks, and that has a lot of different elements to it. It's not just VIP at the airport. If you are a member of Congress, there's going to be a special desk at the airline that you call, or that your staff calls.
Like literally a desk, like in the airport, or a phone number?
a phone number, and it's not at the airport, but the phone for making reservations. So normally as a passenger, you're not allowed to just make reservations on a bunch of different flights on the same day or back to back. That would be impossible for you to fly. But a member of Congress can book reservations on a number of flights and not have those canceled out as duplicates. The idea being they don't know when Congress is going to adjourn, when voting is going to end. They want to get on that next flight out and don't want to have the flight sold out. So they have the privilege and flexibility of being booked on a lot of different flights that that you and I might not have. So that's one thing.
Do they get through security faster?
So some do. The escorts is a different thing. On an airport basis, it can be provided, but it is not required to be provided by TSA. That's actually something that 2 years ago, Senator Ted Cruz tried to add into the FAA reauthorization bill. So that even there, it wasn't all members of Congress. It was members of Congress, federal judges, cabinet secretaries who had received death threats, right? Which, for all intents and purposes, that's probably everyone. Right. I mean, there's a lot of, you're dealing with a lot of people in the public, a lot of crazy people, so probably everyone. But there was that caveat, and they were supposed to get not just the escort through security, but in the airport as well. It was going to be done. You're going to be kept away from folks. But the special treatment, it was really controversial once it became public 2 years ago, and it was no longer tenable to keep in the bill, so it was dropped before the final version. So they didn't get that. So where it happens now, it's generally done on an airport by airport basis rather than nationally everywhere, TSA mandate. And it can be arranged, but it's not by right.
What's the specific practice at DCA though? I mean, so Congressman so-and-so drives to the airport, drives himself, which is probably pretty unlikely, but in the event he does, he parks for free. He gets to he's got multiple reservations. He gets to the security, and what happens?
So let me be a little bit careful because right now, as we're recording this, we're still in the partial government shutdown. Many of these practices have changed somewhat, and I'm actually not current on what they are doing today.
Okay.
An escort is something that could be arranged by a member of Congress's office, but wasn't something where you just show up and I'm a member of Congress and you take me through. But by the way, each of the airlines has usually special treatment as well, and how they handle that varies. If you go to National Airport and you're flying American Airlines, they actually have a secret room for VIPs. On the E-Concourse, which is the newest concourse at the airport, it's the regional jet concourse that American operates. They have their newest club. It opened in 2021. But right behind the check-in desk, you wouldn't even see it because it's kind of hidden by a panel, but there is a room that is designed in the aesthetic of the Library of Congress. And it has a conference table, it has a television, has a private bathroom, built into the wall, the appearance of books kind of all the way up to the ceiling, and with a mirror up top that makes it look like it goes on infinitely. I don't know that every member of Congress can use it. Okay, so what the actual criteria for it is.
Have you been there?
I have.
What got you in? What do you got to say at the door?
So the staff there were very excited to show it to me. It was relatively new at the time. I used to, for a brief period of time, I was a concierge key customer with American Airlines. And I was so glad to see this new lounge. Oh, you probably don't even know about this. Can I show it to you? Oh, why, please. Yeah, taking lots of pictures. I'm not a cabinet secretary. There are special services employees, premium services employees, and even if you're not a concierge key member, a member of Congress will often get that escort or met at the gate at least,
and take you to the secret room, because it would be bad for American Airlines if somebody started screaming at Ted Cruz in the concourse.
We misunderstand airlines when we think about the Airline Deregulation Act of 1978. We think about airlines as being deregulated, when in fact they are one of the most heavily regulated businesses in the country, right? So what changed in 1978 is the federal government no longer tells airlines where to fly and what prices to charge. And that's pretty much all that's different. But almost everything else about the travel experience is heavily, regulated. The airports are, most cases in the U.S., and this is not how it works in a lot of the world, but in most cases they're owned by, local governments. Airport security is not just regulated by the national government, it's performed by the national government. It's not how they do it in, most of Europe or, much of the world either.
Who owns DCA?
So the airport authority is in charge of it. It's still owned by the federal government.
Got it. And the airport authority has appointees from the local jurisdictions as well as the federal government?
The federal government, it's effectively leased, long-term to the local authority. And so they're appointing from the local jurisdictions. But it wasn't actually ownership that was transferred by statute by the federal government. So the federal government always looms large. And when they're bringing dollars to the table, as we're talking about, we can get into the discussions about, renovations at Washington Dulles, which, the local airport authority was taken by surprise over when there was discussion around, completely redoing Dulles Airport.
Before I jump to that, though, when this change was announced during the TSA Lions crisis earlier this year, there was a kind of populist reaction of, my God, I had no idea congressmen were able to get away with this stuff and we're getting this special treatment. In their defense, we decided at some point as a country that it is a good thing if the people's representatives can be in their district as often as possible because it keeps them close to the people. And presumably a lot of these guys fly enough that they do have a pretty good stock of miles that would give them access to at least some of those lounges.
There's always the tension between populism and what you want in terms of folks' performance, right? Mm-hmm. So I always thought it was weird when Janet Yellen was Treasury Secretary. She would fly coach, right? And it struck me, and she'd be sitting there working on the plane. And this seemed crazy to me. Like, I want her flying the premium cabin because she's going to get a lot more work done. Right. And maybe that's not true with the average, member of Congress or senator even. But with the Treasury Secretary, this seems pretty important. Really frequent flyers are going to have often access to, expedited security, and a member of Congress is probably not going to have a problem, getting vetted for pre-check or any of these other programs. On the other hand, though, I feel like I want the people who are making decisions about how these programs work to, so-called eat their own dog food, right? Mm-hmm. Experience it themselves, understand what the, what the traveler goes through in order to, and if they're apart from that, that may not lead to the outcomes we want either.
Life can change faster than DC seasons. One moment, everything feels normal, and next, your world is turned upside down. So don't let someone else's mistake ruin your spring. Call the team you can count on. NACE Law Group has been standing up for DC families for decades, fighting for neighbors hurt by medical malpractice, wrongful death, and serious injuries. They don't just settle quickly or push papers. They dig in, fight hard, and make sure every client gets the justice they deserve. And here is something that I love. They are a longtime supporter of CityCast because just like us, they really care about this community and the folks who call it home. So if you or someone that you care about has been hurt, don't wait. Call NACE Law Group. They'll stand with you, fight for your family, and make sure your rights are protected so that you can focus on what matters most.
Hi, CityCast CEO David Plotz here. Are you looking for something a little different to do just outside DC this May? Live Golf is back, May 7th through 10th at Trump National Golf Club along the Potomac. And Live is not your typical golf weekend. I really love golf, love it. But usually golf tournaments are expensive and you cannot bring your kids unless you really want to be miserable. But not Live Golf. Think festival atmosphere, food, drinks, interactive fan experiences, golf challenges, and world-class golf. Bryson DeChambeau, Phil Mickelson, Dustin Johnson, and a stacked international field. And honestly, you don't have to be a golf person to have a great time out there. Tickets start at just $26. Kids 12 and under get in free with a ticketed adult. And Saturday night, Bailey Zimmerman closes it out in concert. It's a really easy day trip, a solid weekend plan, and something genuinely fun to do before summer kicks in. Get your tickets now at livegolf.com. That's LIV golf.com.
This is Sister Nancy Downing, CEO of St. Anne's Center for Children, Youth, and Families. For over 160 years, St. Anne's has provided children, young mothers, and families across the D.C. area the emotional, educational, financial, and loving support they need to grow in health and happiness. I'd like to invite you to Hope Blossoms, our annual fundraising gala, on May 13th from 6 to 9 p.m. at the Columbia Country Club, 7900 Connecticut Avenue in Chevy Chase, Maryland. It's an evening to celebrate our families and thank everyone whose generosity has made this mission possible. As our Director of Clinical Social Work, Nina Harvey, says, at St. Anne's, we meet women where they are, affirm their dignity, and help them recognize the strength they already carry within themselves. If you'd like to attend Hope Blossoms, volunteer, or support St. Anne's in other ways, please reach out to Ellen Toops at etoups@stanns.org. We would love to see you at Hope Blossoms on May 13th from 6 to 9 p.m. at Columbia Country Club, 7900 Connecticut Avenue in Chevy Chase, Maryland. See you there.
One other DCA question, because as you said, they're limited slots. Not every airline can fly everywhere. For a long time, there were distance limitations. Members of Congress have also been able to exert pressure one way or the other to have convenient flights instituted to places that they happen to want to go.
Well, so it's often not necessarily where they want to go, but where their constituent airlines want to fly, or their constituents want to fly. And so there is what's called the perimeter rule out of National Airport, and it's currently set at 1,250 miles. You can't fly more than 1,250 miles from that airport unless there is an exemption slot that has been granted in law and then distributed by the Department of Transportation. And DOT is given the authority to decide what proposals by an airline are in the public interest. And they have a number of criteria, and members of Congress will even write into the law as they're authorizing these ways of kind of steering where these are going to go. So most recently, there were 5 new, quote, beyond perimeter slots that were authorized by that 2024 FAA reauthorization. The chair of the Senate committee in charge even sent a letter to the Secretary of Transportation making clear where 4 of the 5 ought to go. It was clear that we were going to get a San Antonio flight, which Ted Cruz, who was the ranking member on the committee, was in favor of. You were going to get a San Diego flight, a Las Vegas flight, and I don't want to misspeak on the 4th one since I haven't looked in quite a while.
Have you ever looked up whether those flights are full? I mean, is it a good business?
It's actually a very good business. It's a monopoly business, right? So I live in Austin now after 18 years in DC. And by law, there is 1 flight from National Airport to Austin in each direction. It belongs to Southwest Airlines. And if I want to go at a different time or on a different airline, I've got to go out to Dulles or I have to connect. It's a good business. Now, I don't necessarily know that the San Antonio flight is doing as well, but it's a protected flight that you don't have competition for. And it's a good premium, good premium market in DC, strong air travel market, and you just don't have a lot of flights to these beyond perimeter destinations. And look, DCA is a good airport anyway because it has limited competition. A majority of the slots are controlled by American Airlines, and so it's a valuable hub for them. What's interesting in the legislation in 2024 was that 4 of the 5 slots they created were specifically for large incumbent carriers. And you couldn't even give them to a small slot holder at the airport. It had to be for the larger incumbents, and you couldn't give any of the 5 to a new entrant at the airport. Wow. So you couldn't add a new airline as competition. And so then you got into litigation even over what constitutes a new airline because that's defined in regulation. Spirit Airlines does not fly in and out of National Airport, but they were a slot holder during the period of time that the regulations specify are relevant. And they still hold slots. They just lease theirs out to Southwest Airlines. They actually pay rent every month. But the way these laws get written is very much to specify who's going to benefit. The original beyond perimeter slots, of course, were famously championed by Senator John McCain And the criticism, of course, oh, well, he just wants the nonstop flight for himself to Phoenix. And he says, no, this isn't about me. I will never take the flight myself. This is what's good for the world. Well, it was what was good for Phoenix-based America West Airlines, right? So it wasn't about him. It was about his constituent.
So let's talk Dulles for a second. Are the privileges for members of Congress the same out there? Can they park for free? Can they do stuff?
So I'm not aware of member-free parking at Dulles. It's never come to my attention. I've never actually asked, but it's always, the focus of my understanding was always at National, which is the close-in DC airport, which is where you're going to want
that makes sense
to travel from, whenever possible. Look,
tell me what you make of the proposals for Dulles upgrade, and then the president's sort of parachuting in and playing a role in that.
There's already proposals to upgrade Dulles Airport, and some of those are underway. And that's a long time in coming, largely delayed because United Airlines didn't want to spend money on Dulles Airport. For a long time, it was viewed as a more marginal hub. You've got the federal interest that kind of came out of the blue, and that, from best anybody can tell, was completely blindsiding the airport authority. The notion that the president is going to unveil that we're going to do something at the airport. At the end of the day, look, if the federal government's going to come dropping a ton of money in the lap of an airport, and it's coming from the president, you're kind of not going to say no. And so they're running this process that is separate from the airport authority, proposing designs, renderings, where the firms that are competing for this business are producing renderings displaying the Donald J. Trump terminal, right, like of their own volition. They think it's going to get them the business. And you've got renaming the people mover the direct jet transport, DJT, right? Instead of the mobile lounges, which aren't going anywhere anytime soon, at least because you've got to get out to these concourses. It is the case that the airport has a lot of improvement that could be done to it. On the other hand, though, it seems to me what the challenges with the airport have long been about its distance from city center, although look, obviously in the time since it was opened, much has grown up around it. It's convenient for a lot more folks than it ever used to be. But also just the way that the airport works, where you've got the head house, but then you've got to get out to the terminals, and that the terminals aren't necessarily well connected, even by the airport train, or you're walking through the underground walkway. And much of the flow of the airport could be improved. It's not just about a new design. I kind of like the design of the head house, the Saarinen designed. It is memorable, and it is of an era. So different folks have different aesthetic tastes.
I was going to say, what do you make of the Manassas Airport? How's that going to change our flights?
I think they should put DC in the name. I don't think that that's crazy at all. I don't think anybody is going to know Manassas otherwise. I think that it's not that much less convenient than
100%.
Dulles. If you look at Europe, all the low-cost carriers that fly to Vienna don't even fly to Austria. They all fly to Bratislava. Right, which is like 30 miles away. It's like two different capitals. But there's going to be lots of objection to that, like we saw with Oakland putting San Francisco Bay Area in its name.
I mean, what's it going to do to our prices and our selection of flights? Is it
look initially probably not very much. Now it's going to be small. I think you can attract some low-cost carrier business with low-cost, with low airport costs. And so there'll be some marginal benefit. And where there is overlap in the flights, there'll be more price competition. So there will be a tendency to drive down price, but I don't want to overstate the effect that it will have, because it will, at least initially, be modest in size and scope, which doesn't mean that United Airlines is going to like it. Right? Like, you're not going to want it. But it is a benefit to the community to have more options. And Dulles is an expensive airport for an airline to operate out of. And so, look, when you're talking about an airline like a Frontier, whose business model is based off of sub $100 tickets, right? And you're talking about even $25 a passenger airports, that is a problem for the economics of the business. And so having lower cost airports supports low cost carriers and low-cost options. And that means more passengers flying instead of driving. So I hope to see this blossom.
All right, to go back to our theme. So how can we fly like Congress people? Is there stuff they get that I could get if I was smart?
Look, I think in many cases, we fly better than Congress people if you're smart. When they're flying back and forth to their district and they're using their office budgets, I mean, that's economy tickets like anyone else. Right, so you'll often see members of Congress in the back of the plane, and if they're flying up front, it's either going to be because they are frequent flyers and there's an extra seat and their status gets them the upgrade, right? Or it may be something that's paid for by a campaign committee that's not being paid for by taxpayers, because taxpayers aren't buying the first class tickets. It's worth looking at a few things. It used to be that most of the first class seats domestically were going to upgrades. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 90% of those first class seats went to upgrades. It's now much, much lower. So upgrades are a lot harder. But that doesn't mean that they're selling these first class seats at a significant markup either. One of the reasons that they're not giving them to upgrades is that they monetize them at very low prices. Often it's tens of dollars difference. So first of all, you buy a ticket, they will present you a price that may not be nearly what it used to be. But after you have purchased your ticket, most of the airlines will be making post-purchase offers or offers at check-in to see if you want to buy it. And it can be, on shorter flights especially, I will see it as low at times as $26 on Delta, $40 on American. I recently saw a Delta flight from Los Angeles to Atlanta with lie flat seats where the upgrade was $99, right, paid. So premium cabin travel may not be that much. The lounges are often a lot nicer than they used to be. When I started business travel 30 years ago, you would have cheese cubes in the United Red Carpet Club. Like that was the snack, But probably the best food at any U.S. airport was at National. And it's in that Capital One. It's not a lounge, it's a restaurant space, the Capital One landing. It's the Jose Andres tapas restaurant. It's for their primarily for their premium card members. You can buy a day, pass. You can actually eat your value out of it quite easily. It's unlimited food and drink, and it's actually good. You go in. You can even make reservations,
and you don't need to get elected to Congress to do it.
You don't need to get elected to Congress. As I'm not aware of members of Congress having special privileges there, although the government affairs folks at Capital One might consider it if they haven't already. And Dulles, their lounges tend to be pretty good. Their food is good. Their coffee to go is quite good. They have a to-go area where you can take food out of the lounge with you, prepackaged, take on your flight. And so if you have the right credit card for the airports you fly out of, then you can get some elevated experiences. Plus, most of those cards rebate the cost of your global entry or pre-check that gets you expedited security.
How much do those cards cost?
So taking that Venture X card from Capital One, $395, but they give you $300 as a credit to use through their travel portal. So you buy an airline ticket on their website and you have $300 to spend, or a hotel or rent a car. And then they give you 10,000 points each year that are worth at least $100. So you're kind of covering your costs and you're getting your lounge. They do also rebate the cost of pre-check or global entry. And right now for airport security, the best tip going is that there just aren't that many people using TSA touchless yet. And so if you have pre-check, register with your airline for touchless. You go into a separate line, you use the biometric identification, and you skip to the front of the pre-check line. It's fantastic now because it's still relatively new and not that many people have opted into it or even realized what it is. And so using pre-check and then opting into that gets you through security pretty quickly. Escort or not, you don't need an escort. You just walk up, here's your face, and you go on in. And look, members of Congress don't get this, but at a price, you can get just about anything. So if you're in a position, right, there's the PS terminal in Los Angeles and Atlanta, and they're opening at Dulles and in Miami. It's a private terminal for people flying commercial, where they, you go through a dedicated security and you sit in your private room, you get food, and they'll drive you to your aircraft. And Washington Dulles announced that they were going to build one back in 2023. It hasn't actually started yet. They haven't actually awarded the contract. There is a plan for Dulles Airport to get this private terminal as well. So you can get that. You can also get escorts through the airport. If you're flying American Airlines out of many of their airports, including national, they have what they call 5-star service, which you can pay for. If you're flying first class cabin, you can pay extra. Have somebody meet you curbside, walk you through security, walk you into the lounge, walk you to your gate, watch your flights, make sure if you have any problems that they take care of the rebooking for you, as though you are a concierge key member for a day plus, which is great service.
Wait, one last question before I let you go. These descriptions of really nice things. We first got to talking during this period where there were news stories about people showing up at the airport at 6 a.m. for a noon flight, that kind of stuff. That's gone away for now. How likely are we to go back to that?
I think we're probably pretty likely to go back to that at some point because of the way that we have airport security done and the way we do budgeting in this country. The next time we have a government shutdown and we ask people to continue working with deferred pay, and we're not talking about people that are earning tremendously. Look, in law, their income was increased significantly, which helped recruiting, and we haven't had the staffing problems that we used to have, paying CSA screeners a lot more, but they're not in a position to go without paychecks, and they've got to make rent, and so these folks are going and working Uber instead of showing up at the airport. And so next time that happens, we're probably going to have it again. And we know that wasn't the case at the airports that have private screeners. And so there renewed discussion around, should we have more private screeners? And look, I think ultimately, we do what we do in this country. That's not the reason we should do it. We should probably fix our budgeting problems, how we go about asking folks to work but not be paid because they're essential workers. What's interesting is that we have the same entity regulating security and performing security, the same way we have in air traffic control, the same entity regulating air traffic control and performing the service. And that's generally not a world best practice for accountability and safety. So I would have to venture a guess to your question that, we're probably back in this mess because we haven't fixed any of that.
Gary, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Always happy to chat.
Before we go, thank you to our newest CityCast neighbor, Geet J. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you for the nice note you sent us. If you want to become a neighbor, join at membership.citycast.fm. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year. And that is all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.